Roxie and the Hooligans by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor. Chapter 3 Into the Sea. If you are buried in an avalanche, do not panic. Dig a hole around you and spit. The saliva will fall downward, telling you which direction is up. Roxie knew that Lord Thistlebottom and Uncle Dangerfoot had been buried in snow once, but she bet they had never been buried in garbage. Either way, snow or garbage, it was dark where she was. How was she supposed to see which way her saliva was falling? Roxie spit and landed back on her face. She began clawing at the garbage above her, only to find, when she reached the top, that Helvetia Haggis had got there first. "I'll get you for this," Helvetia sputtered, with a banana peel draped over her face. Another head appeared, attached to Simon Surley. Then a hand belonging to Freddie Filch popped up, and a foot that could only be Smoky Joe's. "We'll get you for this, Roxie Warbler," they cried, struggling to grab her through the glop. But who could know that the truck had reached the water's edge? Suddenly the dumpster began to tip. Roxie and the Hooligans began to slide. When they could no longer hold on, out they spilled along the garbage onto a barge that soon left shore. And there they were, on their way out to sea. The barge had an acre of garbage in it, from dozens and dozens of dumpsters, and though it was open at the top so Roxie could see the sky, the sides were steep and slippery with a stinking mix of rotten sausage and spoiled fruit. Whenever the Hooligans emerged from the stuff, a hand bobbing up here, a leg over there, they looked like slimy sausages themselves, their hair plastered to their heads with hamburger grease. "We'll get you, Roxie Warbler," they bellowed, spitting out bits of moldy cheese and fish scales. "We'll throttle your engine," cried Simon Surley. "We'll blow your whistle," yelled Freddie Filch. "We'll stop your clock," screeched Smoky Joe. On and on the barge went, farther and farther out into the ocean, as Roxie and the Hooligans tried to stay on top of the mess. Just when they had her surrounded, the tugboat pushing the barge slowed to a stop. The hinges on the barge began to creak, the bottom opened, and suddenly Roxie Warbler and Helvetia Hooligans went sliding, sliding, sliding down into the water. The last noise they heard was the sucking sound of the sea, as it swallowed the load of grapefruit rinds and coffee grounds, old gym suits, and paste pots. And then 5 filthy children began swimming for their lives. Now, all the students at Public School Number 37 knew how to swim, because they lived so near the ocean. Every year, on the first day of first grade, every child was taken to the local pool to learn to stay afloat. Every year, on the last day of first grade, every child was taken to the pool once again and thrown into the water. If he hadn't learned to swim before, he learned now. So it was no accident that the 5 children all rose to the surface, blubbering and blowing. The tugboat and barge grew smaller and smaller in the distance, heading back toward shore. The 5 children looked about them to see just what kind of a fix they were in. You would think that the 4 Hooligans, having almost been buried alive in a dumpster and drowned at sea, would forget about chasing someone with big ears. You would think they might want to work together to get back to their parents in chin in hand. But Helvetia's Hooligans just seemed angrier than ever at Roxie Warbler. If only she had stood still in the playground, they seemed to be thinking, and had let them put the underpants on her head, with her ears sticking out of the leg holes, and slimy eggs plastering it to her skull, none of this would have ever happened. And so, when Roxie spied an island not far off, she began swimming as fast as she could, and the Hooligans followed, foreheads furrowed, faces grim, and with every stroke of their hooligan arms they muttered, "Get Roxie! Get Roxie! Get Roxie!" Roxie swam faster than anyone, if only because she was the most frightened. She plunged forward as soon as she felt land beneath her feet, and gasping and panting, splashed out of the water, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. But it was too late. Simon Surley was the second fastest swimmer, and he too reached the shore. Slithering along his belly, he grabbed her ankle, bringing her down onto the sand. When attacked by an alligator, Lord Thistlebottom had written, "Do not panic. Cover the beast's eyes and try to climb on its back." Over and over they tumbled, but Roxie covered Simon's eyes with her hands and climbed onto his back. Simon could not see where he was going, and for a moment Roxie thought she might get away. But then Helvetia reached shore next, and she tackled Roxie, digging her sharp teeth into Roxie's leg. "If a bear bites you on the arm or leg," Lord Thistlebottom had written, "do not panic. Hit him on the snout." Roxie brought her fist down hard on Helvetia's nose, and when the bully of all bullies opened her mouth with a howl of pain, Roxie ran up the bank just as Freddie Filch and Smoky Joe were coming ashore. Roxie may have been the fastest swimmer, but she knew that no matter how fast she ran, Smoky Joe was faster. Now that she had rolled onto Simon's back and Helvetia on the nose, they would be like angry bees after her, and spying tall seagrass ahead, Roxie ran for cover. When chased by a swarm of bees, Lord Thistlebottom had written, "Do not panic. Head for a field of tall grass, if possible, and this will impede their progress." It impeded the hooligans' progress all right, but it slowed Roxie's as well. When she reached some woods beyond the seagrass, she headed for a tall tree and began to climb. Up, up, until she reached the highest branches, and there she clung, frightened and exhausted, too tired to go on. The hooligans followed as far as the tree, but no one tried to climb it. They were too worn out, and most of all, they were thirsty. They sank down onto the ground and leaned against the trunk, trying to catch their breath. Finally, Helvetia said, "She can't stay up there forever. And when she comes down, we'll get her all right. We'll fix her wagon." "We'll punch out her lights," growled Simon surlily. "We'll clear her deck," panted Freddie Filch. "We'll clean her plate," squeaked Smoky Joe. And then the hooligans lay still. Up in the treetop, Roxie was thirsty too. The salty ocean was still on her tongue, and she tried not to think about the water fountain back at school, or the jug of iced tea in her mother's refrigerator. Down below, the hooligans stretched themselves out in the little bit of sunlight that filtered through the trees, hoping to dry their clothes. No one strayed far from the others for fear of getting lost. Perhaps they thought that surely, someone would come looking for them soon. Morning became afternoon, however, and the shadows began to lengthen. Night was coming on, and Roxie thought that once the hooligans went to sleep, she could climb down and get away. But then she thought of the night creatures that might be creeping around in the woods, and she decided to stay where she was. The sky went from gray to purple, and from purple to black. Roxie could not see her hand in front of her face. One by one, the hooligans began to snore. Helvetia sounded like a chainsaw. Simon sounded like the sea, and a snore that sounded like a pesky mosquito could only belong to Smoky Joe. When Roxie heard another noise coming from below, it was not the sea, not the wind, not an animal. It was a soft, frightened sob of a boy. Roxie listened, surprised. She waited, wanting to be sure, and then she whispered down, "Freddie?" There was no answer. For a long time only the chainsaw, the sea, and the mosquito could be heard, and then the sob came again. "Freddie?" Roxie asked. "What's the matter?" Finally he answered back, "I'm scared." "Of what?" asked Roxie. "The dark," sobbed Freddie. "That's okay," said Roxie. "Sometimes I get scared a lot too." But Helvetia had woken up now, and it wasn't okay with her. "Scared of the dark?" she scoffed. "You better quit sniveling, Freddie, or I'll give you something to be scared about." The woods were quiet after that.